Welcome to the Newsmakers Podcast. I'm Billy Hollowell, and this is a show where we go behind the headlines every day to bring you an interview with a pastor, entertainer, politician, or other notable news figure. And this is a show, again, it's daily, but it's based on our weekly TV show, which is also called Newsmakers. You can watch it on the CBN News channel and also on our YouTube page. And on this show, every day, we dive deep. It's a little more longer form with one of the people who you will often see on our Newsmakers show or across the CBN News platforms. On today's Newsmakers, a representative from Christian Solidarity Worldwide joins us to talk about the new report, North Korea, We Cannot Look Away. He will explain why North Korea particularly has disdain for Christianity and what is going on inside the hermit nation. That and more in just a moment. Let's welcome him here to Newsmakers. Well, David, I want to thank you for joining us today. It has been 10 years since a landmark UN report showing really the dire state of scenarios inside of North Korea. This is a loaded question, but how have things changed and what is the current state, particularly when it comes to religious liberty inside of North Korea?
No, thank you for having me, and thank you for your question. Unfortunately, the situation in North Korea has only deteriorated since the COI, which is the Commission of Inquiry report in 2014. I'll add for a little bit of historical context. I think that 2014 report was very helpful in terms for human rights, because before that, North Korea was mainly discussed only in terms of what the Kim regime and the Kim family were doing in terms of nuclear proliferation and growing the nuclear weapons they have access to. And the 2014 report showed that we don't only have to worry about the Kim regime's nuclear capacity. The true cost of the Kim regime's totalitarian rule is the people of North Korea and how they are affected. And so in the 10 years since Kim Jong-un, the son of the previous ruler, has been in charge, he has really isolated North Korea in incredible ways. But prior to him taking over, there was actually some level of cooperation between the South Korean government, which seems crazy in today's climate. There was a factory right on the border with North and South Korea that was owned by South Koreans. And North Koreans were able to come and work there, gain a wage. So that there was some cooperation previously. There was a communications tower where they had a direct cable to Seoul, but Kim Jong-un closed that factory and he actually blew up that tower in a stunt to show how ruthlessly he intends to clamp down on religious freedom and all freedom of expression, freedom of newspaper, freedom of any form of expression. Even just this earlier on this year, 2 high school students were sent for a life of hard labor for watching K-dramas. So the simple thing that millions of people around the world watch on Netflix every day, and they're sent to jail and sent to labor for that. So when you fast forward to think about religion, one of the most what's seen as countercultural and the most threatening to the Kim regime itself, Christian groups and other folks in the country that practice traditional Korean religion, they are executed, they are exiled, and they're sent to jail for the possession of a Bible, for holding church services. It's one of the most radical things that people can do in that country, and it's seen as traitor. It's seen as treachery to the government.
You know, some people who don't understand, and you have a new report out, by the way, that we are going to talk about. We Cannot Look Away at CSW, and we'll talk about what is in that report, what you have found. But when we talk about North Korea, I think it's a very foreign concept, especially to people in the West, to have a government that obviously operates in this way. There have been some reports over the years that the North Korean government almost operates as though it's a religious cult in and of itself. Can you speak to some of that, that the people are essentially trained to worship Kim Jong-un and worship the government? Is that accurate? Take us through sort of those dynamics there.
No, that's a helpful question. And when you speak about North Korea, I think that's one of the common themes that you see is people believe that the Kim dynasty are deities and they're seen to be God-given rulers to the people. And I'll say that it's like any good answer to a question, it's a yes and no. So the North Korea has been pretty much isolated from the world since the end of the Korean War, which was in 1953. And so the older generation of Koreans would have severe reverence, this is North Korea, would have severe reverence for the Kim regime. And because, believe it or not, at the end of the Korean Civil War, the North was more prosperous than the South. And many people think today, which is true, that South Korea is one of the most prosperous, wealthy nations on earth. At the end of the Second World War, nearly 60% of the population of all of the Koreas were illiterate. It was one of the poorest places on earth at the end of the Second World War. So South Korea has had this incredible economic boom since the end of the Second World War. It's known as the miracle on the Han River. The Han is the river that flows through the capital, Seoul. And so there's been this incredible economic boom in the South and isolation in the North. And to maintain that complete and total grip on control, the North Korean regime has built the Kim family up to be deities. But we were just there in Seoul, Christian Solidarity Worldwide, and my colleagues to launch a report. And we spent time speaking with North Korean refugees who now live in Seoul. And they said their parents and their grandparents' generation had total reverence for the Kim family. They thought that they were God's ordained rulers, and they were there to guide them and care for them and provide prosperity to the North Korean people. But since that generation, there's been two huge famines. There was a particularly severe famine in the 90s, and today there is famine spreading throughout the country. So that there is a generational divide, and younger Koreans do not see the Kim regime in that light at all. They follow along with what looks like the ritual of worship in order to survive, in order to not come under scrutiny of the government, in order to go to college, in order to have a job. North Korea has it would be similar to the caste system in India, that there are social rankings, and these can it's very difficult to move up a ranking. You're sort of born into that ranking. And so there's immense pressure to maintain loyalty, because you know that it could affect you, your family, your children, to have access to food rations, to have access to jobs, to access to education. So there's a lot of social pressure created in the system of loyalty, and that mean people will act and look like they're worshiping the regime, but in reality, they're doing it to survive. And so younger Koreans, we were meeting with a 28-year-old who told us that none of his friends believe the current ruler, Kim Jong-un, is a deity. They follow along in order to survive. But their parents and their grandparents would have viewed it slightly differently, would have had more reverence, and maybe even beatification of the more senior Kim rulers in previous generations.
That's really interesting, the generational divide. I can't imagine the angst and, pain that could cause, especially for younger people being forced to sort of follow along, whereas maybe some of the older people have been indoctrinated into it because of that experience that you described. Why do you think Christianity in particular, obviously any dissenting viewpoint is targeted by the North Korean regime, but why in particular is Christianity a target?
Sure. I think there would be a couple of reasons to that. One is that most North Koreans, when they escape on the border with China. So North Korea has three borders, a big one to the north with China, a very small one with Russia, and obviously one in the south with South Korea. So very, very few folks are able to flee south into South Korea. There's maybe a handful every year. So most folks go north into China, and they're helped by Christian missionaries. And a lot of South Koreans and Chinese missionaries take extreme risks to help North Koreans. So it's common for the first people in the outside world for North Koreans to have contact with are Christians. So Christians are the one who are telling them, you've been sold a lie, you're living in a hermit, isolated kingdom, and this is what the real world's like. So on one hand, Christians are seen to be the people that shine the light on the isolation and the totalitarian regime of the Kims. Secondly, South Korea has a very large Christian population, and the USA has a large Christian population. And they're seen to be the two enemies of North Korea. They declare that they're their two ultimate foes, is South Korea and the USA. And in some ways, you can say that they're both Christian nations. I know we might not see that here, but that's kind of how it's viewed in North Korea, that it's a Western Christian religion and it's an imposition on the North. And the church that grows in North Korea is the underground house church. And it's a way of completely undermining the authority and the rule. So it's sort of three factors of Christianity is often, or Christians are often the people that kind of burst the bubble on the North Korean regime for refugees. It's seen as the religion of the states that North Korea views as their foes, and it's seen as an insidious force that can draw North Koreans away from worship and loyalty to the Kim regime and to discovering an alternate way of loyalty. And in some ways, it could be like the underground church in Rome and the early church. That you can see some parallels there.
And, I know it's hard to measure some of this for obvious reasons. When you have a hermit kingdom, being able to go in and survey people, it's not an easy thing to do. But how much is the church growing inside of North Korea? What do we know? Because you mentioned the underground church, that's where that growth is happening. No. It would be interesting, whatever data we do have, or even anecdotals, to sort of hear some of that.
Sure. I think I wouldn't put any numbers on it because there's just no way of knowing that with any accuracy. There is a branch of the Korean government called the MOU, the South Korean government called the Ministry of Unification. And part of their work is to interview North Korean refugees once they've left North Korea, once they arrive in South Korea. And so anecdotally, we know from those interviews that people are aware of churches taking place in the country. And there was even reports of churches in Pyongyang, so that's the capital of North Korea. And going back a little bit to the sort of hierarchy caste system, Pyongyang is the capital. And in order to live in Pyongyang, your family needs to have the best credit score in the whole country. So only the most loyal people, the most dedicated people, and the most trusted people in the North Korean world are able to live in Pyongyang. If you don't live in Pyongyang, you need a special pass even to enter the city. And it's very difficult to get one of those. So from that, we can sort of interpret if there is a church meeting in Pyongyang, and the folks that are going to that church are taking unbelievable risks. They are risking their family's exile from Pyongyang for generations to attend the church. And I know it's only anecdotal, from the testimony of some refugees who have arrived in South Korea. But if that were true, that would be truly, truly remarkable. That if there is a church in Pyongyang, the most dangerous place, and the place where Christians would take the most risk to go to the church, socially, politically, that would be sort of a window in that there would be churches across the country if there was one in Pyongyang.
Let's talk a little bit about We Cannot Look Away, this report from CSW. This report obviously takes a deep look at all of these issues. Take us through some of what people will find in the report and why you believe this is important for us to understanding the current state of affairs there in North Korea.
Certainly. So I'll say if your listeners are interested, they can visit the CSW website. I'll just Google CSW North Korea report, and you'll see that the report's available in English and in Korean. So we summarize the changes in North Korean law over the past 10 years. We summarize some of the key events in the country. But like we said at the very start of our call, we often think about North Korea in terms of just what they're doing with nuclear weapons. And what we're trying to emphasize here is when we only think about North Korea in that terms, there's a complete dehumanization of the people there. And we cannot look away from the people, from their humanity, and from their suffering. If we only look at North Korea in terms of what Kim is doing, we miss completely and utterly the devastation that causes to the North Korean people. So we name some individuals. So we name 3 South Korean missionaries who have been arrested in North Korea, and they've been jailed there for 10 years. One of whom, his name is Kim Jong-wook. So today, when we're recording this call, is September 19th. Tomorrow, September 20th, will be the 4,000th day of his imprisonment. So they've been there for an incredible amount of time. So we're trying to highlight very key and specific things that people can pray for, and people can go to their various governments in the UK or in the US to advocate for clear action. And when it's very difficult to think about clear action with North Korea because it's this bizarre kingdom that we don't really know much about, and we kind of get these little glimpses where we can see behind the curtain. But to have real people, real faces that we can think about, that gives us a little bit of tangible action. So as I was saying earlier, refugees go north into China in order to escape. In October of 2023, 500 North Korean refugees were returned to North Korea by the Chinese government. And when the Chinese government did that, they broke international law because there was a well-founded fear that those North Korean refugees would be tortured. And it's illegal for any country to send refugees back knowing that they would be tortured. So the report also calls for sort of technical policy for governments around the world to call China to account for their refoulement, for their sending back of refugees. And in the United Nations, all members of the United Nations, all 190 or so countries, every 4 years, they have essentially what is a performance review of how they're doing with their human rights records, their labor records. And this year, at the end of this year, North Korea is having their UPR, their Universal Periodic Review. And in that process, all other countries that are UN members have the opportunity to ask questions to the North Korean government, and the North Korean government has to respond under UN law. So we are encouraging governments around the world and encouraging people that read to reach out to their local politicians to say, North Korea has their Universal Periodic Review coming up at the end of this year. So we want you to specifically ask them to release these 3 missionaries, to name them, and to give clarifications and proof of life of the 500 North Korean refugees that returned in October last year. So there's sort of a big kind of 10,000 view overview of the situation, and then clear, tangible asks for governments around the world on how to bring the specific cases of several individuals to light. And we see the upcoming UPR as a really crucial moment in holding the North Korean government to account, because that only happens every 4 or 5 years or so. There's an opportunity for countries to directly ask members of the North Korean government for answers to these questions.
Final question for you, because this is all very helpful, particularly the prayer points. I think that's something that we often forget. We hear these situations and as Christians, we often move on without thinking about how we can be praying specifically for these situations. So I appreciate that. What has been, and this may be difficult to answer, the one story that you have heard of persecution in North Korea that has stuck with you, remained with you, that you have not been able to shake during your time working in this space?
That's a tough question. I think it would be unfair to pick just one story, because there's such incredible need in the country. So and you hear just unimaginable things, horrific things. The young man who I was thinking about earlier on, the 28-year-old, he left with his mum, but left his father behind, knowing full well that his father would pay the price for him and his mum leaving. And he was stuck. Or he told the story of when he crossed the river, he knew that there was a choice of leaving with him and his mum and his dad behind, or not leaving at all. And we could never fathom that sort of choice. We just never could truly understand what that sort of choice would be like. We would never ever know. And so I think remembering, like we've said, the main thrust of our report is when we only think about North Korea in terms of nuclear war or nuclear weapons, we dehumanize the people there. So let's not forget the people. Let's not look away from their real pain and their real suffering. And let's remember them. There's the 3 South Korean missionaries who are there, but they're lucky in some way because they have governments around the world advocating for them. There are thousands of other North Koreans who are in jail, who are in penal camps, who are in labor camps, who don't have any government to advocate for them. They have no home to go to because North Korea is their home. And just unimaginable brutality, fear for most of North Koreans there. And I'll also share that it's common for there to be forced abortions for women when they come back to North Korea, because if the child has been conceived outside of North Korea, the government presumes that it was by someone who's not ethnically Korean, and they want to try and maintain a pure bloodline in North Korea, very similar to what the Nazis regime did with their Aryan projects. And so, executions for watching what we watch on Netflix every day, forced abortions, life sentences for hard labor, for holding newspapers or Bibles. So I think it'd be unfair to just pick one story, but just unimaginable pain and trauma and torment and risk for things that we take for granted every day. Watching TV, reading our Bible, calling loved ones, we're in election season in the US just now, saying something critical about a potential candidate, and just things you can never ever do in North Korea.
I mean, yeah, every person would be imprisoned essentially in America, for sure. I mean, that's the thing. Americans have the freedom, so we're able to speak and share. And what you were saying is so true. This idea that you would be forced to make this unimaginable choice for 99% of Americans, that's something that we would never be able to even comprehend. And so I appreciate you breaking that down and sharing with us. Again, where can people go if they want to grab the report? Tell us one more time.
Yeah, CSW's website, csw.org.uk, or you can just type into Google CSW North Korea report, kind of look away, and you'll be able to find it there in both English and Korean.
Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me on.
That's all for today's Newsmakers podcast. Be sure to tune in for the next episode of the show, and also head over to the CBN News YouTube channel and the CBN News channel to watch Newsmakers every week. We'll see you soon.